It is time, my friends. I am here to give you the ultimate and greatest Whirlwind Barbarian guide you will ever see in Diablo 4, period. We're talking about the no bleed variant of Whirlwind, which is going to be the superior variant. I'm going to give you every single piece of information you need. It's been fine-tuned after the most recent Blizzard kind of fix to our aspects. They didn't fix everything, but they fixed enough to make a really solid build. I'm going to be going over everything, and I mean everything from Paragon trees to what if you're an early level, what if you're an end level, what if you're my level 100 and just want to speed farm blast through everything. This video will have it all. Let's go. What up, my friends? It is MurderInc here, and like I said, we're talking about the Whirlwind Barbarian. So where could we possibly start? Let's start with the build planner. All right, so the link to this is going to be in the pinned comment. I know I got tons of comments the last time I did a video on this build, and they somehow overlooked the pinned comment. It's going to be at the top of the comment section. Get that link, open it up while we're going over this, or just listen and enjoy. So, first thing we're going to talk about is Edge Masters was not working, along with ripping. I'm not using ripping in the build I'm talking about right now because there are better options. There are more safe options, and it's important for you to know. So, what has changed? What did I do differently? How can you min-max this? Well, after swapping to this and swapping the Paragon tree, I've been critting up to 2 million with my spins. 2 million. That's a lot of damage. Before it was like 1.3, 1.4, so we min-max this to the T here, and I'm here to bring it to all of you. So listen, I'm going to stop fluffing this around and get straight to the point here. So before we dive into the planner, I want to make one quick, observation on many builds I've seen using Retribution here. Now, I don't know if someone's figured out something that I haven't. However, the bottom section that says you deal 36% multiplicative up to 40, of course, 20 to 40, increased damage to stunned enemies only applies to that 8% chance of the distant enemy that was stunned. I have not seen any data from my testing personally, a lot of testing, that has given me this multiplier by hitting ground stomp on all of the enemies or just stunning from the skill tree. Maybe I'm missing something. But to use this aspect that has an 8% chance, 8%, of sending a distant enemy just to see a big number every now and then, it doesn't seem worth it to me. So now that I clarified that, we can get back to business here. So first thing on the helmet aspect of the protector, giving you a barrier, numbing wrath on the chest armor, Gore's devastating grips. What if you don't have Gores? Fantastic question. Head on over to the note section. Here we see Gore's replacement, any gloves with crit rate, rank to Whirlwind, and you're going to be using the Relentless Berserker imprint. What does Relentless Berserker do? Fantastic question. Let's go over here. Back to this, we will type Relent. Here we go. Damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to a 40% chance to extend the duration of berserking by 1 second. Doubles this duration if it was a critical strike. And of course, it's a lucky hit chance. If you're not familiar with how the lucky hit chance works, usually it's rather low, but we have a 22% chance on our Whirlwind, which is decently high because we are spinning and hitting mobs very often here. So do not be discouraged by seeing the lucky hit chance by any means, because it's going to be good enough. So that is what you would do for the majority of people who are still grinding away to get their Gore's devastating grips. The next thing, aspect of disobedience on the pants here. I've seen some people putting it on the neck. Don't do that. Armor falls off significantly in the late game, and it's much better to keep them on the pants. Moving on to the boots, we're using Grasping Whirlwind. Main hand bludgeoning weapon, Dire Whirlwind. We like that crit rate. Earthquake aspect, one that scales very well with this build. Very important here, putting on a weapon as well. For the slashing weapon, Conceited deals increased damage if under a barrier, which you will get on elites from the Protector buff. And finally, Limitless Rage on the second weapon here, up to 30% multiplicative damage. Now we have the first major change, which is Edge Masters, which is very, very strong. Like I said, I was critting for about 2 million earlier, and I'm going to show you that run where I was critting for 2 million, but we put Edge Masters on the neck piece. Let me go to it really quickly. I am using the basic imprint from the Codex because once this was disabled, I made the stupid decision of getting rid of all of my Edge Masters. So I am missing 15% multiplicative damage. What does that mean? I should be critting for 2 million way more often. That's what that means, which is kind of busted. That makes this build even better. So it is what it is for that, and that's very, very strong. The next thing, of course, we have Echoing Fury on one of the rings, and Bold Chieftains, another thing that people are grinding for on ring 2. What if you don't have Bold Chieftains? I'm glad you asked. If you don't have Bold Chieftains aspect and you are copying this build, I highly recommend taking aspect of the Umbral. It's going to give you 1 to 4 of your primary resource, which is Fury in our case, when you crowd control an enemy, which we are going to be doing all of the time while we are spinning. So that's the breakdown here. This is kind of the endgame setup, but a lot of the swaps with Gores, with the Bold Chieftains rings, that's going to be where I think a lot of players are in the level 50, 40, all the way up to 70 range. We're still piecing together that perfect build. Next thing we have is the skill tree, a ton to talk about here. So we're going to take Lunging Strike and then Enhanced Lunging Strike simply to open up the next portion here. And a lot of people have been asking, Murder, how are you sustaining your rage? How are you doing it? You see you use your shouts, you go in there, you start spinning, you stun, you blow up, you start one-shotting things, but like, where is all this rage coming from? It comes from the skill tree, and I haven't gone through it in depth enough before, so I'm going to now, so we're going to clear all of that up here. So Enhanced Whirlwind, Violent Whirlwind, moving on to Pressure Point, 1 point in Ground Stomp, Enhanced Ground Stomp, and then finally Tactical Ground Stomp, generating a further 25 Fury every time this hits here. Now, if you're a highly endgame player, and I do want to make one kind of comment when I'm going through this, if you are going to share this guide, this Diablo 4 builds.gg planner here, you have to either explain it very well to them or show them this video as well. Because there are so many variations that I'm going to talk about here, and I'm not going to make 7 planners because it's going to get way too confusing. Am I this planner? Am I that planner? People are going to show different planners and say, oh, your build's wrong, your build sucks. I don't want to get into all of that. So I have one generic planner here that's useful for the majority of the player base, and I'm going to talk about all the nuances you can change here, whether you're crazy endgame speed farming, getting to endgame where you're pumping but not quite at the speed farming level, or you're in the gearing process. So the first thing you can change here is you can remove all of the ground stomp, even the first one, because you can get plus to ground stomp on gear. If you get lucky and get that, you can run this baseline. What does it do when you start adding points? It reduces the cooldown. That is good for you. Lower cooldown on ground stomp, the more often you can use it and the more multiplicative damage you get based on how this entire build works. So again, the most general one's going to be taking Fury, or you can swap into Strategic Ground Stomp for the reduced cooldown of Wrath of the Berserker for each enemy damaged. So I'm going to leave this here for now. The next is Rallying Cry, 5 points here. This is where resource generation comes from, and this is where I guess people missed it a lot. Increase your resource by 56% for 6 seconds here, then you take the Unstoppable, and finally Tactical Rallying Cry, which generates 20 Fury and grants me an additional 20%. So basically any source of Fury generation we're getting is boosted to the moon for 6 seconds while this is active. Next we have Challenging Shout, which a lot of people saw in my last video where I ran up to a mob, hit Challenging Shout and kind of just sat there and built Fury from that. So we have Enhanced next, and finally, while Challenging Shout is active, you gain 3 Fury each time you take damage. If you're pulling an AoE pack, you're generating tons of Fury from there. Next we have Warcry, 1 point here, 1 point in Enhanced, and finally Mighty Warcry, giving us 15% of our base health as fortified, which will be important when we do get to the Paragon tree. Now, if you're super endgame, you're probably going to take a point out of this, put one into if at least 6 enemies are nearby when you cast, gain a multiplicative damage bonus, very strong, and then you would take, of course, the points out of here and put them into this for more multiplicative damage on the Warcry as well. So now that we talked about that, let's put this back. 3 points into Booming Voice. Your shout skill effect durations are increased by 24%, giving us obvious bonuses to Rallying Cry, Challenging Shout, and Warcry. Now there is a tankier version of this that you can take. Let me make sure I swap this back correctly. Where if you find that you don't need the Fury generation, you can take 1 point out of here. You don't want the increased 1 second, sure, take the point out of there. And if you want either a heal, which is rather small, so I probably wouldn't recommend the heal, but more importantly, you gain damage reduction for 5 seconds after using the shout skill, so you can definitely take Guttural Yell 2 points there if you do take them out of Ground Stomp. So let's swap this back here. Next, we have Aggressive Resistance. This is damage reduction while berserking, which berserking is going to be given to you from your Warcry as well as Wrath of the Berserker here. So fairly decent uptime. While berserking, free generation is increased by an additional 18%, so that's even more Fury gen. Now, if you're endgame, you're not going to need this. You can take all of the points out of here, and you can pretty much plug and play what I'm talking about. Another maxing out the Warcry, which is very strong here, and that's going to give you 5 out of 5. This is what I run personally, but for most players, you're probably going to want the damage reduction and the Fury, unless you're completely max geared GG and you don't need any of this. Next thing we have is going to be Pit Fighter. Deal 9% increased damage to close enemies and gain 6% distant damage reduction, which helps for those annoying archers that kind of backpedal you all the time. And then crit chance on stunned. We're stunning all the time, so that's a nice bonus to our crit chance. Finally, Wrath of the Berserker, 1 point, 1 point, 1 point. 3 points into Heavy Hand for increased crit damage, 3 points into Wallop, and then 3 points into Concussion, giving us a 45% chance of stunning while spinning, which is huge, happens all the time. And then finally, Unbridled Rage. This is what makes us burn through our Fury all of the time here. Now, if you're having Fury problems, you can take this off. However, make sure you take all of the Fury generation talents we talked about here first, and then see if you still need Unbridled Rage. The next thing I want to talk about is pretty important here. It's going to be the gearing. So on this note section, I have most important roles on gear to consider. Helm cooldown max life, not required, but life certainly helps. Neck cooldown ranks it defensive. Fury cost reduction, making things cheaper to spin, making you spin for longer. Rings, crit rate, resource gen. Boots, Fury cost reduction. And then weapons, strength, crit damage, vulnerable damage. Legs and chest, you look for damage reduction. So I'm going to get into that right now. In game right here, just so you have a better example of this. So as far as a chest piece goes, damage reduction to distant enemies, damage reduction while fortified, because we're max fortified all the time. Total armor isn't optimal, but we do have it. You can get it from close or distant enemies as far as damage reduction goes. And then I like max life because we don't have tons of sources of max life here. So it's very important for me personally. Next, we have the chest piece, and here we can see just pure damage reduction. Close enemies, distant enemies, and while fortified. And then I have 3 ranks to my Rallying Cry, which is right here, giving me an additional source of resource generation. Because as you can see, we have 8 out of 5 here, and as far as item contribution goes, I'm getting 6 points from item contribution, which means I only have 1 point baseline. And as far as the helm goes, like I already explained, cooldown reduction, most important. I have a max roll, I got lucky here, and then health, because health is rather hard to come by for sure. For a best in slot ring setup, you want, like we see here, critical damage, resource gen, vulnerable damage, and crit strike chance. Very, very important. The same thing applies for the next. I have damage to close enemies, but it costs me an arm and a leg to reroll this, so I kind of have to wait for a new one. I think I'm up to like 3 million gold per reroll now, which is suboptimal for sure. Next thing is the weapons. Like I already kind of stated here, crit damage, vulnerable damage, strength are going to be the top 3. Then you can pick core skill damage, damage to close enemies, or all stats. All stats may be important, and I'm going to get into that for the Paragon tree. And as far as boots go, we already went over this. Movement speed on kill of an elite, and then Fury cost reduction being one of the most important ones. So now that we covered all the gear, you should be pretty good on what you need to do. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be the Paragon board, which many players have asked about, and I'm going to break it down to you like you won't believe, because personally, the Paragon board is extremely important, and it's very hard to min-max unless you spend hours and hours, and I literally mean hours, min-maxing where the points should go. So with that, I want to give a massive shout out to a Barbarian user named Dark Helm, with a 3 instead of the E in Helm. He made an awesome Paragon board. We went back and forth, we fine-tuned it a little bit, but huge shout out to him. He showed me something amazing, and I'm going to give you guys that amazing finished product in this planner. All right, so now that we're at the Paragon board, let's dive straight in. Pretty straightforward. We go straight up here. The first thing you're going to want to take is going to be Martial. Now, when you see this Paragon board, you have to understand a few things when this was min-maxed. It is split up based on glyphs, so that there are 2 strength, 2 willpower, and 2 dexterity Paragon boards. Why is that important? Because if you overload one of them, 3 strength, 1 dex, 2 willpower, you might find yourself short on stats and hard to kind of overload one of the nodes getting the max bonus out of the glyphs. Very important thing, and I don't think that's talked about enough. So for the first node, like I said, we have the glyph Martial, very strong for reducing your shout cooldowns, pretty much mandatory after the nerfs that happened a long time ago. Look at the bonus, 95% bonus to all magic nodes within range here. Once this gets to level 15, it expands greatly, and look how many magic nodes we can take. Gives us to boost to armor, physical damage, just so many things we can get double benefit from, and the most blue nodes you will ever see here, which is why it's so important, on top of how powerful this is for early progression. So this was kept in mind with early progression. Next, we're going to be moving on to the second tree, Warbringer. Now there's one thing I want to show you guys in game, because they do not do a good job of explaining this, so I want to explain it to you guys here. When you're picking your Paragon boards, and you're going to a next section, and you click the board attachment. Okay, so it looks like I can't do it. Okay, here we are. You can scroll through, see what you want, hit preview, and then rotate the board as you want. And then if you have the points available, it's going to have an attached board section. This is something that they did not do a good job of explaining. I couldn't figure it out at first. When I first started playing the game and clicked on, I said, what the hell is this? Like, honestly, what the hell is this? What am I looking at? Why would I want to preview a board? I'm just trying to smash things. I'm a barbarian. We smash. So I just wanted to make that really quick point, because, yeah, that wasn't so user-friendly if I couldn't even figure it out. Maybe, listen, I'm not going to say I'm the sharpest tool in the shed, but it is what it is. So getting back to the Paragon board, we are then heading to the Warbringer board second. Very important here. Very, very important. We are then going to take Exploit, which is massive for us. Massive, massive. When an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This can happen more than once every 20 seconds per enemy, which goes to my previous video, which is why I said before you pull a mob, challenging shout, run by them, see what the mob scene's looking like in the distance, then come back, group them all up, and then spin. You proc Exploit on the maximum amount of enemies here, so you're not just wasting your first hit on like 3 mobs and then pulling some major pack. You want to make sure you're procking Exploit on everybody, which is why I personally open up with what? Ground Stomp. Ground Stomp hits everything around you instantly, will proc that vulnerable, and you will pump them to death. You get the crit damage bonus, the multiplicative damage bonus from the legendary Quake aspect, so huge, huge, huge. Okay, so this is what we took here, pretty self-explanatory. Rare node or raw power, that's not a huge deal, but we get to go straight up to the Warbringer node second. Very important, max this out on Fortify very quickly and early into the game here. I've seen a lot of Paragon boards that have this later in the tree, like the third one, which could be fine. And I know a lot of people are rushing Hunter Killer. I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to struggle with Elite for a very long time. Based on how the scaling in this game works, it only really starts to get hard at like level 85 or higher. and you are so far into the Paragon tree by then. So this is why I don't recommend rushing Hunter Killer first. I think it's not overhyped, but overhyped for where most players would be speccing into it at first glance. That's my reasoning for taking Warbringer first. Tested it, gave it to a friend who's kind of like an early on Barbarian. He's crushing it. He's tanky, he's not dying, spinning to win, win-win situations. The next board we have Decimator. For Decimator, we're going to be looking at the Undaunted tree. So a direct progression-based correlation between having more Fortify now with Warbringer and doing increased damage while fortified and getting 10% damage reduction the more Fortify you have. So this is our first willpower tree. We went strength first, then dexterity, and now willpower, where we're just overloading this tree in all willpower, and we get our first major bits of vulnerable damage. Now, one important thing here, if you look at the bottom, it says 317 out of 360 dexterity, where I'm not hitting the limit. This is because the Altars of Lilith bonus stats are not counting for this. So if you for some reason haven't collected all of your Altars of Lilith and you don't have those bonus stats on your character, this is why I was saying it's important to consider things like all stats on gear. I know people are going to say, but all stats is a damage loss, how can it be worth it? It's going to be worth it because all stats in a perfect world would be replacing strength. So if you look at this weapon, for example, I do have both of these stats here because I haven't re-rolled strength to vulnerable damage yet, which hopefully will happen soon since this is such a strong weapon, but all you're losing is 100 strength. You might be thinking, Murder, 100 strength is massive. Not as massive as falling short on the Paragon rare node secondary bonuses. I will tell you that for a fact. Now that we went over that, we have Undaunted here. Moving up, we're going to be taking the rare node Pillage for even more vulnerable damage and armor here, which leads us to our, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4th Paragon board, which is Weapons Master. This is where we get the Hunter Killer node, and this was, like I said, between me and Darkhelm. We theory crafted this. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I think it's way too early, even still, to say there's a perfect Paragon board, but this just makes a lot of sense. And tons of hours went to theory crafting this, mostly on his end. I just did a little bit of fine tuning, but based on where player progression is going to be. So by the time you're getting to this 4th board, this is where elites will probably start hurting a little bit and you won't just be one-shotting everything. So with that, you're going to head straight up to the Hunter Killer here, where we get a massive boost to our damage to elites. Damage to elites here, and then another 16% bonus here. Again, don't worry about that dexterity not being met. That's being displayed on the Paragon tree. And then the next clip is going to be Imbiber. So for Imbiber, we have for every 5 willpower within range, you deal X% increased damage while healthy. You're going to be healthy often because you're so tanky and you're fortified most of the time, and you have a crazy amount of willpower in this tree. So in the end, like I said, all of these glyphs and Paragon boards are about overloading each and every single glyph with as much of the main stat that's in relation to these glyphs as possible. So if you're curious what something like that looks like, let's head to the first exploit. We have 30% vulnerable damage, 49 out of 25 dexterity total, pumping. Then for the next one, we have Imbiber giving us 72.5% damage while healthy. 72.5% because we're stacking willpower. This is what it's all about. So from there, we're going to move on to the next tree, which is going to be the Carnage board. From there, we're going to head straight down here and add the Crusher glyph. What does Crusher do? For every 5 strength purchased in range, adds increased damage while wielding a mace. We don't care about the additional bonus here, but we do get damage while berserking, which is nice, and we get damage reduction from close enemies. Any form of survivability is going to be a welcomed addition to this type of build. And here what's going to be different, especially for this tree than a lot of other trees, is we have damage while berserking and berserker duration. Important stats to note, and it's going to be a pretty big benefit since we do have 2 sources that allow us as barbarians to berserk. And if you're curious what those 2 sources are, let's go over them. The first one's going to be Wrath of the Berserker, where we get 5 seconds of berserking, and the second one is going to be Warcry, another form of berserking. So having increased duration on this is going to be very helpful. And we can just take a look at the stats here. I believe Berserker duration is among these. Berserker duration bonus plus 30%. And now while I'm here, really important like disclaimer here, I've seen a lot of people talking about attack power. So if you're not aware of this, attack power is bugged along with a lot of display information here, like crit strike damage, 508% crit strike damage bonus. I don't have 508% crit strike damage. I don't know where this numbers are being generated from. I don't know if it's counting my Paragon board, which we haven't got there yet, but this is just a side point. So be really careful when looking at these stats here, because it does seem like there's some huge error with what stats are actually being displayed to you, which kind of sucks. So if you're curious about what I mean, or you don't really believe me, that you don't think this is wrong, here is footage from a clip of a run that I did, like literally I want to say 5 hours ago, and you can see critical strike damage, it says 542%. Now again, without changing any gear, I'm not sure how I magically gained 40% crit strike damage, but I didn't. I just didn't. And I've also seen my display attack power at 12,000, and I've seen it at 8,000. So there's definitely something weird going on here with the displayed stats, which sucks if you're kind of looking at them often, but we're going to have to deal with it for now. So going back to the Paragon board, we talked about the glyph Crusher here. We talked about the Berserking node, and then the final glyph, once we get and make our rounds to level 100, is going to be Wrath. You might be thinking, Murder, isn't Wrath like crazy important? The answer is yes. Wrath is crazy important, and there are ways to make level 100 only Paragon trees that give you the most benefit, and this is one of those. So does that mean you're going to be screwed if you're leveling up? No, because we made sure while making this that it works and makes sense while leveling up. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is, I probably wouldn't touch Undaunted, but you can change Imbiber. So if you want to take out Imbiber while you're leveling up, swap it in with Wrath so you get that Fury gain from crits much earlier. You can put that here and you can start taking, I believe it's Dexterity, am I right? I am right. So you can start taking Dexterity, and you can see there's actually blue Dexterity nodes, which is going to make it even easier for you to fill the Dexterity requirement. We have 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 33. Okay, so like we're way over. Way over. And then there's even more on the bottom. So you see where I'm going with this. 38 total Dexterity, unless I miscounted somewhere. I don't think I did, but so 38 total Dexterity if you replace it with Imbiber. If you are kind of finding yourself in need of even more Fury generation. However, we have this here because, as we can see here, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 45, 54. We have 54 decks on this final tree juicing Wrath here. What does it do? Core skills deal increased critical strike damage. So as you can kind of see from that one example here, all of these Paragon trees were made so we can just overload these glyphs with as much relevant stats as possible while taking the most beneficial rare nodes and magic nodes as well. So that is this Paragon tree. Those are the swaps you can make. You need to consider that, and like I said, if you're going to be sharing a guide like this, make sure they understand and they watch the video so they have a complete understanding of what we're talking about here, because there are so many swaps that you can make to make your life much easier. And one thing I didn't even mention here, I kind of just mentioned Warbringer. Another reason why this second Warbringer board was used here is because Fury on Kill, you now get this like crazy early. So Paragon board unlocks at 15. If you do your Renown, you get a ton of points here. And by the time you're like 55 or 60, you will have Fury on Kill almost instantly. And all of this adds up, which helps you sustain your Fury even more. So we went over the gear, we went over the Paragon board. I went over the playstyle in a previous video, so I'm not going to cover that too much, but what I will do is I will finish off this video by showing you one of my runs here, and maybe I probably should know where it is, and I don't, but we were speed farming a nightmare dungeon here, and unfortunately I forgot to swap around one of my aspects, so I was a bit squishy, but we were just blasting 1.3 million spins here, and I'm kind of looking for that juicy 2 million as we go along here. But this is nice. I am using the temerity boots because I'm using the speed farm version of this build, but like I said, I Didn't swap aspects, so I'm definitely not as tanky as possible. And you kind of just saw right there, my example from earlier, how I walked forward to see what kind of mobs were in the area to make sure everything kind of made sense for me. And then I moved back once I determined there was no lethal threat ahead of me. Okay, so we're out here, we're pumping. I'm not even using the explosion like my past video with the tactical nuke. I got stuck on a rock here, it kind of sucked. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but you get stuck on rocks quite often. So as you can see, just pumping 1 million, 1.2 million, 1.3 million spins, huge, huge. So by this point in the video, I know I just gave you a massive amount of knowledge, like massive amount. I'm not expecting anybody on their first listen to this to completely absorb everything I just talked about. That would be, if I was watching this video for the first time, I would have to go back and watch it a couple times for sure. So I get that. But with the information I did give you, once it fully sinks in and you can apply it to your gameplay, you are going to notice a night and day difference, mostly from the point of view that you just now as a whole understand the Barbarian class way more, which will help you make more informed decisions based on your preference of playstyle and what you like to do overall. Is this the 2 million? Okay, we're just deleting these mobs here. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry about it too much. All right, we got walled here. You'll love to see it. What do we got? 1.3, 1.3, 1.5 million spin, 1.2. Here it is. This is what I'm talking about. This is what the build can offer you. This is what all of the hard work of me chatting with people in Discord, figuring out what's best, what's worst, min-maxing the Paragon board with you guys have been amazing viewers. I cannot say how incredible it's been to see you guys commenting. This is that end result here. This will probably make the thumbnail because then those numbers are pog, right? Let's just play this back one more time. It's one thing to see someone use that gore explosion and just do the insane burst. It's another thing to see at 1.5 million, 1.6 million, and then 2 million damage back to back, considering I am level 100, I get that. But just think about this. I know I mentioned this before. I'm missing 15% multiplicative damage from Edge Masters now that it's working again. So the possibilities on how hard this build can hit in the long term for anyone considering playing this is massive, like absolutely massive. And it's been a ton of fun. It's hard to say, and yes, it may be boring at times, but that this build isn't an extremely fun build. And after that, I did run into the infamous Butcher in this Nightmare dungeon, so I just figure why not show it. There he is, Mr. Butcher. What's good? How's it going? We use our stomp, we start spinning, we start critting him for 1 million, 1 million, 1,800,000, dead. See you later. Nice knowing ya. Just casually grinding out some nice XP for our glyphs here, which is very important. You should do that for sure. And then we move on. All right, guys, so that's going to conclude my final upload of the Ultimate Whirlwind Guide. This should have explained everything. I don't think I missed anything. I mean, I could talk about the weapon expertise. Of course, you want to make sure that the bludgeon's in the Whirlwind hand, because that's where we're doing our damage from. And with that, we get the two-handed mace expertise here. What does this do? Grants up to 2 fury when hitting an enemy while berserking, doubled with a two-handed mace. Lucky hit chance, and we already went over how our lucky hit chance is 22%. That's even more fury gain. And then we're going to select the axe expertise since we're not using an axe, and we really want this increased damage to vulnerable enemies as well as crit strike chance against vulnerable enemies. So really big here, and with that, that does it. That covers it all. The Whirlwind Barbarian is here. I'm level 100. I'm excited for the future of this channel, with this community. We have a lot to go over, and without doing any spoilers, wait for the next video. It's going to be an absolute banger. So look forward for that, and I will see you then. Enjoy the rest of your days, evenings, mornings, whatever it is, and I'll see you in the next upload.